Alright everybody, welcome back to the channel. Khalid here again. And in this video, I am going to talk about how Vipassana helped me to overcome my alcohol and drug use. So I started, as most people, started drinking, doing drugs. I started smoking weed in high school, got to college, started drinking, just the normal progression, I suppose, in America. If you're somewhere else, that might not be the normal progression. But, drinking and weed smoking is pretty common in America. So, I didn't start for any particular reason other than one of my friends was just like, hey, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah. And I did it, and it was awesome. It was amazing. I remember the first time I smoked weed, it was just felt so fantastic and so wonderful. I remember the first time I drank alcohol, and I was so social, so outgoing, so up and amazing and rejuvenated. And so they were fantastic. For my young mind, alcohol and drugs were awesome. Like, I loved smoking weed. I used to smoke weed so much. I used to drink so much. I went around the world and I drank a lot. Luckily I have come out of that. And I came out of that because of Vipassana, because of my inner journey. And so I'm going to share with you today what that looked like, why it looked the way that it did, and why I made the decision to stop. And it was really that which put it in, because even with alcohol, of course I would drink, and the next day I would get a hangover. Then I would promise myself, I will never drink again, right? I will never touch another drop. But then I do, so I had things like that where it was, something would happen and I would promise myself not to do it, but then I would still do it because, my intention to not do it wasn't strong enough. And really the thing that gave me the biggest push to finally stop was Vipassana. Because what started to happen as I went to more courses, more 10-day courses, and I continued to practice and I continued to develop in my practice, right? I started to notice what it means to feel good. Right, I started to notice at Vipassana when I would be on a 10-day course, the first couple days, it's just like the mind letting go of all the things in life. Then the next few days, you start to go deeper. And, by like day 5, 6, 7, I'm just in heaven. That is where I go in heaven, right? And I used to think that, when I was drunk or I was high or I was on this drug or that drug, that, that was heaven, that I was feeling euphoria and bliss. And at that time that was, right? Because I never felt that good. But as I started to really feel good in Vipassana and I started to really go into my inner journey and into my inner world, I noticed the depth of goodness that I felt in Vipassana, and the level, like my whole being, I felt good at the core of my being. And that is what alcohol and weed and other drugs were missing, right? And as I practiced, I still continued to drink. I think for my first few courses, I still continued to do drugs. I still continued to do all these things because, first I wasn't super committed and I wasn't like, I'm going to stop. But what happened was, as I continued to see, I started to think to myself after, having these deep, beautiful experiences of pleasure at the deepest level of my being during the courses or just during meditation practices at home, when I started to get into an altered state of mind through drugs or alcohol, I started to ponder, right? I just started to wonder, what is this that I'm feeling? Like, what is it to be high? What is it to be drunk? Like, what is this feeling, right? And I was, started exploring it like I do, like, where in my mindscape do I feel good? What's the difference? Excuse me. What's the difference between, being in this state and my sober state, right? Like, what is it to be drunk? What has changed in my internal landscape that I'm saying that I'm drunk, right? What are those changes? And so I started to track down and really focus on what I was feeling. What state was I in? And I started to notice that at the surface of my mind, right, at the very top of the surface, I was feeling bliss, I was feeling pleasure, I was feeling good, but that the root of my being did not feel good, right? It was like I was on these drugs and alcohol, and the root of my being did not feel good. It was almost as if being in that state through the use of, those chemicals was blocking me off from feeling the pleasure that I felt at the depth of my being when I was meditating, right? Or when I had meditated and I was sober in the day, and I just felt good inside. And I started to feel that I stopped feeling good at one point, right? There was a moment, right? I used to read, online, what is alcohol, right? But I do some research, and one of the most interesting ones at that time that I found was it said that alcohol is a depressant, right? I was just doing research, and apparently, right, the way that it acts on your mind, it slows things down, it inebriates you, it makes you feel, it decreases your motor skill and all these things, and it was called a depressant, right? But that did not make any sense to me, because I felt so amazing, right? When I first started drinking, I felt amazing and on top of the world. And I was like, if I could put a word to this feeling, it's the opposite of depressed. Like it couldn't, it's not depressed. I'm not depressed. I don't know why they call it a depressant. Like all this research, scientific research, it's all right and it's all correct, except with this one. Alcohol is not a depressant. It does not make me feel bad. It doesn't make me feel sad. It doesn't do these things. They don't know what they're talking about with this one. With all due respect, the scientists are wrong with this particular thing, right? That was like my stance. As I developed in my Vipassana practice, though, and I, had a more consistent practice, and I really noticed, what it meant to have the full awareness of my mind, what it meant for it to be functioning at, a certain level, like even a standard level or a slightly peak level. Then when I started to drink, I would notice that decrease. There definitely is a decrease in functioning and capacity and all these things. And it finally clicked. It finally made sense to me why it was called a depressant, because I started to feel how I would start here. I like meditated in the morning, and I'm like being consistent in my practice, and I'm like at a certain level, right? My mental capacity is at a certain level. Then when I start drinking, that level decreases, and I experientially felt that. And I was like, holy moly, this is a depressant. It's taking my faculties away. Right? Before, I used to think it was giving me faculties, right? It was giving me more confidence. It was giving me more social energy. It was giving me more outgoingness, right? I was seeing it as, something that gave, not necessarily something that took away. But through Vipassana and through other experiences in my life, I started to develop the things that it was given me, right? I started to be more social as I grew older. I came out of, my social anxiety. I started, worked on myself. I traveled the world. I was able to meet so many people from all over the world, and I was able to break free of that social fear or that lack of comfort in social situations. And once I was able to develop that from my own experiences, from, just honestly traveling the world and meeting so many people, that's what really clicked that for me. So I had these skills now. I have the confidence, right? I had all these things that alcohol used to give me when I didn't have them. But now that I had all these skills, it no longer is giving me more confidence because I was already confident. It was no longer making me social because I'm already more social. What I started to notice now was what it's taken away from me. Because once I had all the things that it gave me naturally, then of course the only thing left is it's not going to give me new things, right? It's not going to give me deep insights into the nature of reality, right? It's not like mushrooms or something. It has its particular pros and cons. And once I got all the pros myself, only cons were left, right? And so I just started to notice, oh shit, this is making me depressed. This is lowering my state of being. So at that point, it became a question of, then why am I doing it? Right? Like, why am I doing this? And so the biggest one, right? It's like I could be confident, I can be social, but that feeling euphoria, with like weed or ecstasy or these things, it was like, you get this euphoric feeling. That is another thing that Vipassana gave me, because the euphoria that I felt when doing, drugs that give you euphoria, again, it was at the surface level of the mind. It was just up here, I would feel good, but the depth, right? The depth of my being did not feel good. And so I started to notice that as well when I was getting high, or I was doing, ecstasy with my friends or these things. And it was like, I would be in those states and I would again wonder, okay, where are the changes happening? What in the landscape is changing for me to say I am high on this particular substance, right? Like, what are those specific changes and what are those specific things in myself that I am enjoying now and that I'm experiencing? And, once I started to look at that level as well, it just wasn't hitting the spot that I wanted it to. And it was becoming disappointing. In a way, right? It didn't matter how high I got. It just wasn't enough. There was a part of me that was like I feel great, right? Objectively, or maybe not objectively, but like subjectively, I could objectively say I feel good, right? There is ecstasy, there is euphoria within me, but there was still a certain level of dissatisfaction with something, right? It was like dissatisfaction with life, dissatisfaction with myself. I don't know exactly what it was, but there was a certain level of dissatisfaction at the core of my being that I could not, like, it just couldn't move aside, right? It just didn't go, no matter what I put around it. There was just this core that was not gonna move, right? So I then thought to myself, when do I feel this? Like, when do I feel this lack of disappointment? Like, when is this depth, that deep dissatisfaction, when is it cured? Or for lack of a better word, when is it satisfied? And that was when I was in deep meditation, deep practice, whether it's a yoga practice, meditation practice, and, so I dabbled a little bit in kirtan and kawali and like these other spiritual practices. And it was like, those were the times where the very depth of my being was satisfied, right? And so then with this, the euphoria that drugs gave me also started to become empty. They just started to become empty and meaningless again. So then it became easy to give up, right? It became easy to say, this ain't it. Like, my base experience is higher. My base experience feels better than the state that I enter when I take these chemicals and these intoxicants. And it was just better. It was just worse, right? These intoxicants made my state worse. So then there was literally no reason to do the drugs, right? It wasn't helping me feel great to the level that I understood. And that's what really Vipassana helped me understand is first to really know the different layers of the mind, right? To be able to feel, okay, here's the surface level of the mind, here's the mid-level of the mind, and here's the deepest part of the mind, because that is what the Vipassana practice is all about, right? It's like using the sensations in the body, which the subconscious is able to, or understands, and working at the deepest level of the mind, at the subconscious level of the mind, to change, right? And so what that also brings is awareness of the deeper levels of the mind, awareness of the different ranges of the mind, so that something that just makes the surface happy, I started to see that it didn't really seek down to the core. And that's why these things, right? Like, an alcoholic, somebody who takes alcohol all the time, probably has not figured out life, right? Probably is not enjoying life to the fullest, right? Like when we say alcoholic, at least for me, and lots of people that I talk to and, read about, it's a problem, right? It's a problem to be an alcoholic because you have an issue with life, or you've got an issue with dealing with your trauma, like whatever it might be. That state, right? Being in that state is a sign of a problem. And it's not a sign of like, oh wow, this guy is so amazing, he's a drunk, he is he's the top specimen of a human being, right? That's not really where that goes, right? And so just being able to look within and to really understand the makeup of the mind, to really understand how these different things affect the different aspects of the mind, and then having a tool and a technique to be able to fulfill all these different layers of the mind, and the deepest layer being the most important, because really that's what I love about Vipassana, right? That's what I love about this whole tradition, because it really emphasizes the root of the mind, at the depth of the mind. This is where change needs to happen, because you can make changes all up on the surface. You distract yourself on the surface, you can do this on the surface, but that will not lead to everlasting change, right? If you're coping, then by working at the surface level of the mind, then that's what you'll always do. You'll always just be coping, right? You'll never move to a point where it's no longer like you no longer need to cope with it because you've healed, right? It's like any work that you do. First, of course, you have coping mechanisms. Of course, you have you learn how to be with things, right? And then ultimately, the goal is to become free, right? Let's say you're a super anxious person. You might start with just coming to terms with that you have anxiety, then coming to terms with, okay, how can I best handle my anxiety? And then hopefully somewhere along the line, how to not be an anxious person anymore. Of course, you can still have anxiety, but like how to cure that, how to not be a super anxious person, and how to have a normal level of anxiety. So the goal isn't to just always be in a state of coping and learning to deal with it. It's to liberate yourself, right? And so Vipassana's focus on the depth of the mind really contributed to my ability to just fully stop. To just be like, okay, this is degrading my experience, right? Like I was saying earlier, like alcohol is a depressant. It is depressing my mind. And I could only feel that when I started to really understand my mind as a whole. And that's what Vipassana really helped me do, is understand my mind as a whole, so that I can, make the decisions that really impact my life. Like I am so proud that I don't do drugs anymore, because it's just something that, I kind of wanted to stop anyway, but it was really easy to fall back into. But then when I got to the point where it was like, oh, this is, taken away from my life, this is decreasing my life, then it became easy. And that is what helped. And it's really helped that for the last few years, I've been just a serious, dedicated old student, because I will definitely say, if I did not meditate every single day, it would become very tempting, right? It would become very tempting to do those things again, because I would no longer have the inner peace that Vipassana gives me. I would no longer have that inner strength and inner bliss that it gives me. Then my mind itself would start to degrade to a level where, it would become attractive again, where drugs and alcohol would become attractive again, because I'm overburdened. I had a long week. I just want to enjoy, a blunt, or I just want to enjoy a drink at the end of the week, or even at the end of the day, right? My mind would be so stressed and anxious from everyday living that it would become a little more attractive to do drugs and alcohol, right? And so if I were to stop drinking, that's what I think would happen. I think I'd be good for a while, but then, not that I would become so anxious that I couldn't do anything, but that life would just bother me just enough for me to say, I could really just use a cup of wine, or I could really just use some whiskey right now, or, whatever it is. And so I definitely fully 100% know, and I've gone through enough cycles to fully know that is the case. When, I think there is that deep inner need to feel good. Right? There's a need to feel good. And even if being, drunk is an empty, good feeling, it is a good feeling, right? It does feel good. And so if I were to just feel empty inside, I would rather I would rather feel empty good versus empty bad, if that makes sense. So if I was living my life and I didn't fulfill the needs that the depth of my mind has, the surface of my mind has, that my body has, if I'm not fulfilling all the needs that they have and I was feeling empty and miserable, then the empty good of alcohol, or the empty euphoria of weed, or the empty euphoria of all these other drugs would make me want to do it. And I would probably do it, right? And so I'm fully aware that if I were to stop practicing, I would be in a different position. And so I think if you, as a viewer, are currently doing drugs, then ask yourself if it is something that you want to change. And if it is, just know that the deeper that you go into Vipassana, the more awareness you build, the more wisdom that you build, you'll naturally stop doing these things. Because it's not just me, right? It's not just my experience saying these things are empty, right? You never hear, oh, this drug user is just living such an amazing life, we should all be like this drug addict, right? No, like, it's not even in people even who don't meditate, or people who don't, who aren't addicted. Like, nobody is envisioning drug users or drunks or anything like that to be great human beings that we should aspire to be, right? It's just like everybody knows, kind of, you shouldn't do those things, right? Not saying you're a bad person if you do drugs or any of that. But if it is something that you want to stop, and it is something that you're struggling with, and you're like, man, I really want to stop drinking, or man, I really want to stop doing this, I know it's not good for me, I've experienced that it's not good for me, that I want to stop, but it isn't happening, or I'm not doing it right. It's not about blaming yourself or saying you don't have the willpower, because it's not about the willpower or the strength, but it is about the reality of your experience. And if you're in a state, right, it depends on how your state is within yourself. If you have underdeveloped your state such that drugs and alcohol are attractive, that's what it is. It's not that you don't have enough power to say no. It's that your state isn't high enough. And so as you develop in Vipassana, as you develop in your meditation practice, you'll go deeper. You'll be able to really understand the nature of how your mind works. What are these drugs? What is it doing to me? What is it contributing to me? How is it changing my mind? You'll be able to develop these skills just like, I have. And you'll be able to naturally, it'll just become less attractive. It's not even something that you have to do. But at the same time, if you don't alter your state and you don't develop that wisdom and you don't develop that depth of awareness, then it will be very challenging. I will say it will be very challenging. And of course, there are other methods. You can go to AA, you can go to, therapy, there's so many other things that you can do in order to come out of an addiction, in order to come out of drug use, in order to come out of all these things, right? There's so many things. And then this is just one of them. This is one of them where, with Vipassana, the aim is always to come out of something forever, right? Like, let's say you go, you go to AA, you can always relapse because, you're depending on will and you're trying to build these structures and you're trying to build these things. But you might still always be tempted because it might still be better than what you're currently experiencing. And perhaps that's true with Vipassana as well. But one of the things that draws me to Vipassana is if meditating every single day continually enhances my consciousness and continually enhances my awareness. And this is it's a skill, right? Let's say you go to the gym and you go to the gym every day, you don't have to worry about losing muscle, right? You'll continue to develop muscle. Of course, if you stop going, then you will lose muscles. So it's in that trust, right? You can have that faith that as long as you continue to do the practice and you're continuing to build the strength, you'll always have the strength to lift that weight, right? Let's say, that alcohol is a weight that you're resisting, right? Your mind has to resist, and that's how you see it. With other things, it might be that, with willpower, they might be your willpower doesn't just get stronger and stronger on a linear scale, right? And it might not be linear, you might plateau, but generally upwards with Vipassana and with any practice that you commit to daily. You can fully trust that once you get past the point where you can say no, and you continue to do this practice, it's going to just keep going up, and this will become so easy. Whereas with other things, I feel like it's a little bit easier to relapse, right? And I'm not saying, there aren't people who go to AA and then never drink another drop, right? I'm not saying that's how it is, but just from a fundamental perspective of how things work, the stronger that you make your mind through a practice that does do it, the easier it is to come out of it. And so definitely if you're on this path or you're thinking about this path, those are the ways in which Vipassana might help you to overcome drug use, alcohol use. And I hope that me sharing my story and the way that it's helped me, make sense, and also helps you to come out of it, because I do hope for you to come out of any addictions that you might have. I do hope that you come out of anything that is detracting from your life, that is lowering your life and not allowing you to live your fullest life. And I fully understand, you might be in a mindscape where, I can relate to a drunk where it's like, well, I need to cope. And that's all I can do right now. All the strength that I have is to just cope and to just deal with it, And so it's like, I don't think they're a bad person. At the end of the day, I don't even think that they're weak. I just think life is really hard. And sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But at the end of the day, I still wish that even the drunk comes out of it, that they're able to face the hardships of life with their best mind so that they can make the best decisions, so that they can eventually slowly come out of all their suffering, right? Because the longer you remain a drunk, the less likely your life will get better, right? And it's like holding you back. It's a barrier. And really any addiction or any use of any of these drugs is a barrier to your best life. And so I really hope that is removed for everybody. And so if you're on the path of Vipassana, continue to do it. I hope that one day you get to a point where these things are no longer attractive. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Leave a comment. Please subscribe. Have a good day.